let's say you're talking to like a young writer, someone else who's trying to tell a story, and they just want to know how they can, I don't even know, because you can't write a story about joy because that's not how it works. But how would you have stories that are infused with joy such that it helps to sort of cultivate this sort of attitude posture toward life that you're looking at?
I think recently, uh, a way that I've brought this into my work is looking at writing as an act of worship. And if I'm trying to create something as an offering that I lay at God's altar, it changes the dynamic of what I'm working on so much, and it infuses my work with joy, or whatever that is for that artist, whatever that fruit of the spirit is. Sometimes it's just presence. There's some writers, and of course right now I'm not going to think of them, but whose writing can be quite dark, but there's this sense of God's presence within it, even though the writer might not even say God or Christ or Jesus in it. But I also think that there's just this lack, like McFarlane, just this lack of storytelling that is joyful. I always feel like, how do I hate using this word, but how do I market myself? Who's like, but because there's just not a lot of people that write silly, unhinged, essays. And there's not a lot of joyful writers out there. I think in some ways C.S. Lewis was, but he wasn't unhinged and he wasn't silly. But his writing was infused with that joyfulness. I also think of the writer Brian Doyle, who passed away a few years ago, whose writing just oozed with joy and God's presence. And then maybe, like, who is it, the I Cheerfully Refuse, Lee Finger? Yeah, his work. And also that, I mean, that whole book was just like, I am going to have defiantly, undauntedly have joy and hope in this dystopian world. But there's not a lot of writers who do this, I feel. And I think coming to the page as an act of worship would really help to make that happen.
No, I think that's the main and core point. And some sort of ancillary point that I think is related to that is this mindset that I think all of us just sort of get from the sort of cultural atmosphere we're in right now, where so many of us, whether we'd say it or not, have this assumption that the real serious art is it's bleak, it's dark, there's no happy ending. Happy endings are trite. They're for the mass market. I'm a serious artist. And you can see this in like award shows where they'll, they give the Oscar to the movie with the nihilistic worldview that 15 people have seen. And that I think it's very hard for all of us, whether we're writers or whatever, we want to have this sort of thing that we want to write the serious stuff, the important stuff. And it's very hard to break free from that. I think a
Mm.
good example of that is Jane Austen. We recorded a podcast recently. It was about this book, Jane Austen's Bookshelf. It's this really wonderful book by this author, Rebecca Romney. Highly, highly recommended. And it's
I'm writing
basically
it down.
she goes through the woman authors who Jane Austen read and admired, and a lot of them wrote, like there's Anne Radcliffe who wrote Gothic romances, Frances Burney who wrote kind of similar stuff to Jane Austen. And Jane Austen's point was she was basically an anti-snob, where they're all the highbrow people like, oh, this literature, these novels, they're not the serious work that we do, for all the reasons you can expect. And she responds like, no, these novels are great. They're excellent prose. They're really insightful insights into human nature, and they're fantastic. I don't care if you very serious people respect them or not. I think these are good, and I'm gonna like them. So I think a good starting point, if you want a model for a way to do this, is be like Jane Austen.
I was thinking as you were talking that so much of it has to do with a sense of pride too. We get stuck in our own pride and we want to tell the lofty story or write above our ability, perhaps, or not be honest. We can sense that lack of honesty in other people's work. So why aren't we more careful in our own work about being honest? Um, this book I wrote, I was like, you know what? I'm just, like I said, I'm going to be unhinged. This is like I'm writing to my best friend who loves me. even though I'm goofy, and I'm just gonna give you the inner workings of my mind and lay it at the altar, and if you think it's horrible, that's fine, because it's me. There's nothing if you read it, you're just like, "Oh, there's nothing dishonest in this." I'm not trying to look good by any means to an embarrassing fault. And there was such freedom in that. And I've also written things where I know that I'm trying to do it myself and I'm being prideful and I'm trying to teach people a certain political view or you know, it becomes propaganda. I mean, you see that all around and you see it, you read it, and you know what it is, but no one's calling it out. It's like, this isn't art. This isn't good writing. It's propaganda. Sadly, that's what's winning awards these days, and that's what's being uplifted in the non-religious world, especially, but sometimes even our own, you know?
No, absolutely, and I think that's a good point to focus on. It's the fact that propaganda is almost always just very, very bad as artwork, right? And that's regardless of the message, right? Is if it can be sort of the silly kind of paint by numbers Christian romance novels, or it can be the very serious and dour art house movies that win awards, that they're propaganda just for a different message. So the key is to be honest and to be brave without succumbing to that. And that is a difficult thing to do, which is one of the reasons why I think we need to keep talking about this and encouraging each other, because it's not an easy thing
It's
to
not.
do.
I think just staying close to God, worship. When I'm lost on the page and I can't make sense of it, worship. And it makes sense, you know. And I'm one of those people who I don't like to just sing or read. I like to move my body somehow. So I'll go work out or lift weights or go for a walk while I'm listening to reflective music or singing. So sometimes I look a little silly because I will. I'll walk and sing. I'm just getting to the point that I just don't care. It's much more freeing to live this way than to live in fear. I just can't do that anymore.
I love that. I love that. And that I think is a good closing thought, and a good way to point our listeners back to, again, it is Undaunted Joy, the revolutionary act of cultivating delight. The author, writer, the woman of letters, Shemaiah Gonzales.